Sometimes, horror doesn't live in abandoned houses or deep forests. It lives right next door, behind the curtains you pass every morning, inside the yards you wave at out of politeness but never truly look into. People like to believe they know their neighbors, the man who mows the lawn every Sunday, the woman who brings her trash out at dusk, the family whose porch light never seems to turn off. But sometimes, the people living closest to you are the ones you should have feared all along. I never really thought about it until I moved around enough to notice a pattern. No matter where I lived, suburbs, small towns, even apartment complexes, there was always one house that didn't quite fit. Too quiet when everything else was alive. Too awake when everyone else was asleep. The stories I'm about to tell you didn't happen in distant cities or some foreign countryside. They happened in familiar streets, the kind where kids ride bikes, where you can smell barbecue smoke in the summer, where everyone smiles but nobody really sees each other. 3 stories, 3 different neighborhoods, each one ordinary until it wasn't. If you've ever looked out your window at night and seen the faint glow of another house, a shadow moving behind the blinds, maybe, just maybe, you've wondered, who's watching back? Because the truth is, evil doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers from the other side of the fence. Sometimes it stares through the glass with a smile that doesn't blink. And sometimes it borrows your shovel. 5 years ago, my neighbor Charles lost his 14-year-old son. It was on the news, on missing posters taped to street lamps, on people's lips for months. My wife and I lived right next door, and I remember how empty their porch looked after the search teams stopped coming. Every few weeks, we'd see Charles standing outside, staring at the woods behind his house as if waiting for something or someone to come back. His wife, Kathy, rarely came out at all. When she did, she looked like someone who had aged decades in a single night. They were kind people once, the sort who invited you over for a summer barbecue or waved across the lawn. But after their son vanished, something hollow replaced that warmth. They laughed less, spoke slower, and when they looked at you, it felt like they were seeing something else behind your eyes. Still, I never pried. I told myself some grief is too sacred to touch. A few nights ago, that changed. I was taking the garbage out when Charles appeared beside me. He looked worn down, mud on his shoes, dark circles under his eyes. He asked if he could borrow my shovel, said he needed to do some work in the backyard. I didn't even question it, just handed him the best one I owned. He thanked me in a tone too soft, too polite, then disappeared into the dark behind his house. I went inside, but curiosity got the better of me. From the upstairs window, I could see straight into his yard. Under the yellow wash of his porch light, he was digging. Slow, deliberate. The hole was large, too large for gardening, too wide for a fence post. I remember thinking maybe he was planting something to occupy his mind. But after a while, I realized he wasn't planting anything. He was just digging. I decided to help. Maybe that was my first mistake. I grabbed my spare shovel and walked over, calling his name. The way he looked at me when he turned around, it froze me mid-step. He dropped my shovel like it burned his hands. No, Tim," he said quickly, voice shaking. "I got it. Please, just leave." His tone wasn't angry, it was terrified. "What's wrong?" I asked. He pointed toward the gate like I was a stray dog. "I won't allow you to use that shovel in my backyard." I remember how absurd that sentence sounded, but the fear in his eyes made me obey. I left without another word. From my window later, I watched him dig for another 30 minutes. Then he stopped, looked around up at the neighboring houses, the windows. His gaze met mine. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I slowly stepped away, pretending I hadn't been watching. That night, at around 1:30, the sound of metal hitting dirt woke me. I looked through the blinds too dark to see. I slipped outside, barefoot, and crept to the fence. Under the dim glow of moonlight, I saw him again. Charles, hunched, sweating, the rhythm of his digging desperate. When he went inside, I couldn't resist. I climbed over the fence and looked down into the hole. A black garbage bag poked through the dirt at the bottom. Small, tied tight. The shape of it sent something cold crawling up my spine. My mind told me to leave, but my body stayed still, staring. Then I heard the back door creak open. I bolted. Seconds later, he was outside again. Not digging this time, just walking along the fence line, listening. I crouched behind the hedge until he vanished around the house. The next morning, the hole was gone. Perfectly patched, as if nothing had ever been disturbed. His SUV was parked in the street instead of his driveway. I stood at the window for a long time, wondering what he'd done between the time I ran and the time the sun came up. I haven't said a word to anyone. Not my wife, not the police, just silence. Because I don't know what I saw or what I almost saw. All I know is Charles never returned my shovel, and since that night, he avoids me. He doesn't mow his lawn anymore. He doesn't wave. Yesterday, I caught him standing at his window, staring into mine. When he realized I saw him, he closed the blinds slowly, deliberately. It's daytime now, and the house next door is quiet, too quiet. Sometimes, when I pass the fence, I swear I can still smell the earth he turned that night, damp, raw, and freshly disturbed. When I was 15, my family lived in a small suburban neighborhood, the kind where everyone's mailboxes were identical and every driveway smelled faintly of gasoline and cut grass. We weren't exactly close to our neighbors, but we knew them by sight, the dad next door and his two sons, Eric and Todd. I'd only spoken to them once or twice. They always seemed quiet, withdrawn, almost like they preferred not to exist in the same rhythm as everyone else. One afternoon, while my younger brother and I were playing basketball in the driveway, Todd appeared at the edge of the lawn. He stood there watching for a moment before asking if it was true we were moving soon. I told him yeah, probably in a few weeks. He nodded, like he'd been waiting for that answer, then asked if I wanted to hang out with him and his brother the next day to go down by the river and shoot BB guns in the woods. I said sure. It sounded harmless enough. My brother begged to come along, and Todd said fine with a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. The next day, just before sunset, the two of them rang our doorbell. They were dressed in camouflage jackets, duffel bags slung between them, their faces set in some serious, almost military expression. I remember how strange it felt walking beside them, me and my brother in jeans and hoodies, them looking like they were heading into a war they'd invented. The woods near the river were quiet, too quiet, with the air thick and cool. Todd dropped the bag onto the dirt and unzipped it. Inside weren't BB guns. They were real rifles, scratched and heavy, the kind you don't mistake even in dim light. My stomach turned cold. Eric snapped a branch off a tree, threw it into the river, then pulled one of the guns out and started firing at the opposite bank. The echo cracked through the trees like thunder. My brother jumped. I grabbed the gun out of his hands, put it back in the bag, and told them we were leaving. Todd stared at me, not angry exactly, just empty. Eric's face twisted, and one of them muttered something sharp under his breath as we walked away. I remember thinking they were the kind of kids who found power in seeing others flinch. That night, we told our parents the boys next door were weird, but we didn't mention the guns. I didn't sleep well. The air in my room felt heavy, and I woke to a gust of cold air brushing against my face. My window was wide open. At first, I thought I'd forgotten to close it, but then something hard pressed against the back of my head. A whisper, hot and sharp, filled my ear. Shh. My heart seized, but I didn't move. I knew that voice. It was Todd. He told me that if I ever told anyone, especially his dad, about the guns, he'd come back and kill my whole family. His breath smelled of cigarettes. His words were calm, almost rehearsed. I remember whispering, "Okay," just to make him go away. He pushed the gun against my head one last time before climbing back out through the window. I didn't move for a long time. After that, I started seeing them everywhere. At their window, staring into mine. Standing in their yard at night, facing our house. Motionless. Once, my brother said he saw Eric watching him through the gap in the blinds while he was doing homework. The night before we moved, a rock hit my window. When I opened it, Todd was outside, aiming a pistol upward. My brain froze. I hit the floor, expecting the sound of a gunshot. Instead, I heard them laughing loud, cruel laughter that rang like nails dragging down glass. One of them called me a coward before their voices faded into the dark. We moved a week later. I never told anyone what really happened, not even my brother, until years later. Looking back, I realized those boys weren't just dangerous, they were hollow. The kind of hollow that tries to fill itself with fear. Sometimes, when I think about that night, I wonder if they even planned to shoot us, or if they just wanted to know what it felt like to hold someone's life between their fingers. Either way, I still wake up sometimes expecting to hear the window slide open again, that same whisper behind me, telling me to keep quiet. 2 weeks ago, I realized I might be living next to people capable of something far worse than noise or bad manners. I just moved into a rundown house at the edge of a small town cheap rent. Thin walls, the kind of place that smells faintly of mildew no matter how many candles you light. I was fresh out of college, barely scraping by, surrounded by neighbors who seemed to have stopped caring about anything years ago. On one side, there was a group that played loud music every night until dawn. On the other, there were 2 women who made the air itself feel off. One older, maybe in her 60s, gray-haired and always scowling. The other, younger but clearly not well. Sometimes I'd see them on their porch at night, the younger one pacing, twitching, muttering nonsense while the older woman held her back, whispering things I couldn't hear. Once, the younger one pointed straight at me and said something I couldn't make out. The older woman just stared, her eyes flat and cold. I started going inside whenever I saw them. One evening, just before bed, I could hear shouting through the wall. The younger woman was screaming, high-pitched and guttural. The older one shouting over her in frustration. I tried to ignore it, but it went on for nearly an hour, crashing sounds, banging, wailing like an animal in pain. Finally, I lost my patience. I marched over and banged on their door. The older woman opened it, face pale under the porch light, lips tight. "What the hell do you want?" she hissed. I tried to sound calm, told her I just needed them to quiet down. Her expression didn't change. Her head tilted forward slightly, eyes narrowing. Then the younger woman appeared behind her, screaming, "How dare you!" over and over as she tried to push past. The older one grabbed her by the shoulders and slammed the door in my face. I stood there in the dark, hearing their muffled voices fade into silence. I went back home, annoyed, but relieved they'd finally stopped. I fell asleep easily that night. Too easily. When I woke again, it was 3 in the morning. The room felt strange, as if the air had shifted while I slept. I lay still, half awake, when I heard something from downstairs, a slow, soft sound, like a footstep. I sat up, listening, heart beating fast, but the sound stopped. I told myself it was the pipes, an animal, anything logical, and lay back down. 20 minutes later, I woke again, not sure why. The room was pitch black, and this time I knew I wasn't alone. I could hear breathing wet, uneven, too close. My hands fumbled for my phone on the nightstand, fingers shaking so hard I nearly dropped it. I didn't turn on the flashlight yet. I just listened. The breathing came again from the end of the bed. I finally flicked on the screen. The dim blue glow barely reached the corner, but enough to see a shape crouched low beside the wooden frame. A head hair, tangled skin gray, eyes reflecting the light like an animal's. It was her, the younger woman from next door. When the light touched her face, she screamed. A noise so raw and shrill it didn't sound human. I screamed too, stumbling out of bed, slamming into the wall as I ran for the door. I tripped halfway down the hall, turned just in time to see her crawling after me on all fours, her mouth open, her fingers clawing the floorboards. I slammed the door behind me, locked it, then bolted down the stairs. The pounding on the door above was relentless, like she wanted to tear the house apart to get to me. I grabbed my phone, called 911 with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. By the time the cops arrived, she was still upstairs, screaming gibberish, pounding the walls. The older woman came running from next door, pretending to act concerned, but I saw the look she gave me pure hatred, as if I had done something unforgivable. The officers took the younger one away, saying she'd need to be held overnight. One of them asked if I wanted to press charges. The older woman glared at me, her expression like a warning carved into stone. I said no. The cops drove off, the lights painting the houses red and blue. I watched as the older woman turned to go back home, but she didn't. She stopped halfway, stared at me for a full 10 seconds, then smiled a small, knowing smile that froze me where I stood. 5 minutes later, she got in her car and drove off into the dark. Now, nights are worse. I hear knocking sometimes, faint but deliberate. Once, I found dirt smeared across my front door as if someone had dragged their hands along it. I don't know if the younger woman ever came back from wherever they took her. I don't ask. I just keep my lights on and my doors locked, pretending not to see when shadows move in the window next door. Because the truth is, I don't think the older woman ever left. And when I wake up in the middle of the night, I can still hear that sound from upstairs, the slow, uneven breathing of someone waiting to be found. People always say monsters aren't real. They say evil is a thing born from stories, from imagination, from superstition. But I've learned that monsters don't hide in shadows or wear fangs or crawl from the dark they live in. Houses, mow lawns, borrow tools, wave across the street, and look just like everyone else. You never notice them until it's too late. Sometimes they don't even know what they are. They live quietly beside you, convincing themselves they're normal, until something in them snaps and the mask slips for just long enough to see what's really been living next door. I used to think fear was something you could rationalize, that you could explain away the unease, tell yourself it's nothing, that people are just people. But after what I've seen, I've stopped believing in coincidences. The man who dug in the dark, the boys who whispered threats at gunpoint, the woman who waited until the world was asleep to crawl into another's home, they all shared the same look in their eyes. That hollow, empty stare, like something had already taken them from the inside. It's not rage or madness. It's something quieter, older, an absence of empathy that smells like decay long before it kills. We live surrounded by walls so thin, we can hear our neighbors breathe through them, yet we know nothing about who they really are. We convince ourselves the screaming next door is just an argument, that the thuds in the night are pipes, that the strange smell from the yard will fade. We ignore what unsettles us, because acknowledging it means admitting the world is far less safe than we want to believe. It's easier to pretend the horror belongs somewhere else, to movies, to stories, to people who don't live where we live. But that's the real horror, isn't it? It's not that evil exists, it's that it hides in plain sight. Every time I move, I promise myself I'll stop looking through the blinds, stop caring about what happens in the house beside mine. But I always end up staring anyway, late at night, watching for movement behind the curtains. Because deep down, I think everyone knows the same truth I do. You can move towns, change houses, meet new faces, but you can never really escape what lives next door. Maybe that's the scariest part. The unknown isn't some faraway place. It's the space between two walls, two windows, two lives brushing up against each other without ever truly touching. So tonight, before you lock your doors and turn off the lights, glance once more at the house across the street. Look carefully. Maybe you'll catch a curtain shifting. Maybe a light flickers in an upstairs window that shouldn't be on. Maybe someone's been standing there all along, watching, waiting for you to notice. And if you do, if your eyes meet theirs, just remember, you're not the only one who can see through the glass.